The movie we chose was 7 Pounds, with the main actor being Will Smith. Will Smith plays Tim Thomas, who was a very successful aeronautical engineer. Here's the story. Tim Thomas, while carelessly sending a text message while driving, veers across the center line into oncoming traffic and causes a multi-car crash in which 7 people die, 6 strangers and his fiancée, Sarah Jensen. 2 years later, in a bid for atonement, Tim sets out to save the lives of 7 good people by donating his own vital organs, a process that will be completed after his planned suicide. A year after the crash, having quit his job as an aeronautical engineer, Tim donates a lung lobe to his brother Ben, an IRS field agent. He steals his brother's federal IRS identification band and credentials, puts his picture over Ben's and identifies himself by his brother's name, and uses Ben's privileges to check out the financial backgrounds of further potential candidates for his donations. In each case, he interviews them first to determine if they are good people. In one case, the director of a hospice nursing home facility who had an unsuccessful bone marrow transplant seeks a 6-month extension on his back taxes. Tim is unsure of the man's ethics because he claims to be insolvent, yet drives a new BMW. To resolve the issue, Tim passionately asks a resident patient, an elderly bedridden woman, to tell him whether he is a good man, only to discover that the man is punishing the woman for refusing to take a new medication by not allowing the nurses to bathe her. 6 months later, Tim donates part of his liver to a child protective services social worker named Holly. He then finds George, a junior hockey coach, and donates a kidney to him. He then donates bone marrow to a young boy named Nicholas, opting to have no anesthesia during the procedure, an evident consequence of his desire for atonement. In each case, he does not tell the people what his intentions are for his donations, despite being repeatedly asked. 2 weeks before he dies, he contacts Holly and asks if she knows anyone in the system who needs and deserves help but is too proud to ask for it. Holly suggests Connie Tipos, who lives with her 2 kids and an abusive boyfriend, but cannot afford to leave. When Ben arrives to interview her under the guise of dealing with the IRS, Connie is embarrassed and humiliated that he knows what's been going on. She defends her boyfriend, is offended by Tim's suggestion that she should leave with her kids, and kicks him out of her house. In the meantime, Tim moves out of the house and into a local motel, taking with him his pet box jellyfish, decidedly the most venomous creature on earth, with its sting causing death in 3 to 5 minutes. That night, after being beaten by her boyfriend again, Connie contacts Tim. He meets her, tells her not to be weak, and gives her the keys and directions to his beach house. She takes her 2 children and they move into the house. Then she reads the letter from Tim, which includes the deed to the house, again giving no explanation, and asking for her to 1. Respect his wishes, 2. Not try to contact him, and 3. Not tell anyone how she got the house, and 4. Live life abundantly. Tim's 6th candidate is Ezra Turner, a blind telemarketer for a meat company who plays the piano. Tim calls Ezra and harassed him at work weeks earlier to see if he was quick to anger. When Ezra remains calm and humble through the abuse, Tim decides he's worthy. Tim then contacts Emily Posa, a wedding announcement / greeting card printer who has a congenital heart condition and rare blood type that has left her with only weeks to live. Tim interviews her at home, again under the guise of an IRS investigation, and more or less stalks her at the hospital. But then he starts to spend time with her, walking her Great Dane called Duke, weeding her garden, and fixing her rare Heidelberg windmill press. He visibly fights his affections for her, again seeking atonement for the death of his fiancée, but he slowly falls in love with her. Ben tracks Tim down at Emily's house, saying that he will return his IRS credentials. After a passionate sexual interlude with Emily, and with Ben waiting outside her house, Tim disappears out the back door, leaving her sleeping. He returns on foot to the motel, first stopping by the hospital to ask the doctor if there's any chance that Emily will improve. Discovering that she will likely die before a donated organ becomes available, he decides it's time. Tim then fills the motel bathtub with ice water to preserve his vital organs, calls 911 emergency, and reports his own suicide, climbs into the tub, and releases his box jellyfish into the water with him. The jellyfish wraps its tentacles around his arm, causing a quick but excruciatingly painful death. At the hospital, his best childhood friend Dan acts as an executor of Tim's living will to ensure that his organs are donated to Emily and Ezra. Ezra receives Tim's corneas, which cure his blindness, and Emily receives his heart. Afterward, Ben finds letters from Tim that he is to give to each person explaining why he did what he did. This leaves Emily heartbroken. Emily finds Ezra, now a school teacher, at his kids' choir concert at a park and stops him as he passes by. Having never met before, Emily is fixated on Ezra's eyes, knowing that they belong to Tim. Emily begins to break down, which clues Ezra in on who she is. When he says, "You must be Emily," she breaks into tears and they share a heartfelt embrace out of mutual love and respect for Tim.
We are now going to do a mental assessment on our patient Tim Thomas. He's a young man, African American, born in Oakland, California. He graduated from MIT as an aeronautical engineer. He was engaged with no children. His chief complaint is unresolved issues due to the untimely death of 7 people, resulting in extreme guilt because he was the cause of the death. His appearance is always neat. He's slender, tall, and very handsome, and he maintains good eye contact. He becomes restless and agitated when he's alone. He's independent with all of his ADLs. His speech pattern is normal. He's very well versed. His attitude is very serious. He's focused and a little guarded, and he is very compassionate towards the 7 people that he has chosen. Nighttime brings realistic bad dreams from the accident, resulting in some restlessness. Affect is appropriate for the situation. His thought process is very concrete. He thinks literal and elemental. He's not delusional, shows some obsession with finding the correct recipients. He does appear to be kind of suspicious by not answering people's questions. He derealizes in his sleep, dreaming about the accident, and he's a very attentive, well-oriented to time and place, has a remote memory, remembering vivid occurrences of the accident, and he is maladaptive and is coping from his guilt of the situation.
The nursing diagnosis. Mental status assessment at risk for impaired coping mechanisms related to post-traumatic stress disorder, as evidenced by outbursts of anger, managing and carrying out suicide. The goal, number 1, is begin healthy grief and resolution by initiating process of psychological healing within 2 years. Successfully carrying out critical and organ donations. The intervention is use non-threatening, matter-of-fact but friendly approach, be consistent, keep all promises, acceptance, spend time with client, and the rationale is to facilitate a trusting relationship.
For medications, it would be for the pre and post transplants for the recipients. Psychotherapy is acceptance of the gift of life, ongoing grief and emotional support. Community resources would be each other, grief counseling and support groups, and then follow-up care would be for the post-transplant care.